welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and what a delight to have with us today a very special guest. Stephanie Fast is with us, and she's the author of a book that tells a fascinating story, and the book is entitled She Is Mine, A War Orphan's Incredible Journey of Survival. And I think you're in for a real treat. We're going to keep Stephanie here for a couple of segments to hear her story. But you may want to check the book out, and that's what it looks like. And you've got a picture there on the screen, and look for it. You have it at Amazon?
We have it on our site, which is stephaniefast.org.
Okay.
Amazon is also selling it.
Good.
Yes.
Well, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you. Thanks for coming and being with us today. Fascinating story. First of all, tell us about your work and what you do.
Well, we actually work with orphans overseas, and our main job is really to hear their stories. So I go and share my story with them, and we listen to their stories because we feel like every orphan needs a voice. We also build what we call group homes for children in Haiti, and in Ethiopia we work with women that have been working on the streets.
Wow.
And provide a way of income for them so their children don't end up on the streets.
Wow. This whole orphan subject, we hear about it bits and pieces, but not enough. And I know that you want to bring more light to it. How big is the issue out there?
Well, right now, the United Nations is estimating that there's over 200 million orphans.
200 million?
And, you know, a group of that would be children that have parents, but their parents just cannot afford to feed and clothe them, so they just basically drop them off in orphanages. So to say how many of them are without mothers and fathers, that's really hard to say, but it's becoming an epidemic at this point because of the wars and, you know, famine and different things that are going on. There's just every day they're estimating anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000 orphans a day. That's added to that number.
Well, a little bit of a personal connection. My father was an orphan. And so we have great regard for orphanages and their work and what goes on there. Well, tell us about your story. Unbelievable story. And yet it's inspiring.
Yes. Well, I say I am a miracle. There's really no reason why I should have survived my childhood.
Wow.
And yet here I am, loving Jesus, and so excited about life.
Wow.
Yes. But I was a war orphan, the Korean War. It's a war that really, as Americans, they probably know least about, and yet over 38,000 US soldiers lost their lives in the short amount of time in South Korea. I know nothing about my dad except that he was an American GI. And I know little about my mom. I lived with her probably the first 3 to 4 years of my life. I always hesitate when I say that because I really don't know my age. I was given an age after I was adopted, like many orphans are, because, you know, orphans don't have any papers to say, you know, when they were born.
You don't really know your age.
No.
And you really don't know your birthday.
That's right, yeah. So I can just celebrate every day.
Well, let's have a cake.
That's right, why not, right?
Okay.
Life is all about celebration.
Yeah,
yes.
right.
Yeah.
So what happened?
Well, my mother, my memory sort of begins with trouble going on. I remember a lot of yelling going on, and I think my mom must have been living with her extended family. And in South Korea, for a single woman to have a child, that's taboo to begin with. And then a single woman to have a mixed blood child, that is
Even more so.
even more so. And so I think she was given an ultimatum. You know, if you're going to get married and start a family, you can't start a family with this child. And so she actually abandoned me on a train with the promise that she was going to come and get me.
That's pretty normal, isn't it?
That's very normal,
Yeah.
yes.
She left you on a train.
She put me on a train. She gave
And
me
how old were you?
Probably
roughly?
about 4 and a half, maybe
Okay.
going on 5, but yeah, around that age.
Left you on a train.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Oh, I remember it vividly. That's really, but it's like a memory that's etched into your brain. And I remember going on a train ride and getting off, and I was told by my mother that an uncle would come and pick me up, but he never showed up. I didn't know where I started. I didn't know what to do. A train conductor basically told me I needed to leave the train station. So the first night I slept under an oxen cart next to a train station. And, 4.5 years old, the night noises, scared, spitless. I remember crying for my mom. The next morning I got up, went back to the train station because I believed my mother. I believed someone was going to come for me, and no one came. The second night I slept under the same oxen cart, more scared the second night. The noises much, much stronger. Hungry the second night. The first night I had a little bundle of, meal that my mom had made for me. But yeah, that was the beginning of my wanderings.
I'm sure you can talk about then on for long, and I want to come back to bits and pieces, but why were you primarily unwanted by your mother's family? Was it because of your mixed race?
Well, one, that my mother was not married.
Okay.
Second, the worst is because I was mixed.
Okay.
Yes.
So that was a cultural, social
That
no-no.
was absolutely a no-no.
Wow.
Yes.
When did you realize you were abandoned?
I think the second day.
The second day?
Yes.
What did you do?
Well, that was really I went back to sleep that night, and the next morning I was pretty determined as a little girl to find my way back home. And that's what I did for the next 3 years.
Really? And how did you go about that?
Well, I survived.
Yeah.
That's the first few days I followed the railroad tracks because, I thought, well, the train came this way. So if I just go back the way the train came, eventually I'll come to the village that I started in. But of course, I eventually lost the train tracks and wandered in the rice fields and in the mountains and in the different villages. Back then, many of the villages looked very similar. So when I saw a village from a distance, I would think, that's my village, and I would run towards it, and of course it would not be. And so,
did anybody take you in?
No. I was a mixed blood. They had a special name that they called children like me, Tugi, which, means half-breed, in a nice term. But in reality, it's pretty much they're calling you child of dust and nothingness. They did not see myself as a human being.
How did you survive?
I'm a miracle. I am a miracle. One advantage is I wasn't abandoned in a city. I think I would have, in a city I might have been found and placed in an orphanage, but in the country I had resource, at least in the spring, summer, and fall, to steal food from the farmers. So in the spring I would eat the fresh grasses and the frogs in the ponds. In the summertime I would steal the fruits and vegetables that the farmers were growing. In the fall I would eat the locusts and the grasshoppers that would be hanging on the rice stalks, and that was my nourishment. But it was the winters that was so difficult because nothing grew in the winter in South Korea. I had no shelter. I actually slept in the little burrows that the soldiers had dug during the war, and that was but it got cold in those things too and got hungry, so I would crawl down to the nearest village to steal, but in the wintertime, not too much to steal. And oftentimes I would get caught by the farmers and punished in very, very severe ways.
Amazing. So much there. Did you, as a young girl during that time, did you ever have any desire or inclination to pray?
I didn't know anything about God.
Okay.
Nothing about God at all. But looking back on my story, I realize now that I had a spirit.
Okay.
And I believe it was a God-given spirit. That just when it seemed like my flesh wanted to just give up and die, something would rise up within me. And every once in a while, in the really tragic situations, someone would come and rescue me. And not rescue me and take me to somewhere safe, but rescue me from that situation and say, you need to live, little girl. It's very important that you live. Now looking back, I realize they were messengers from the Lord.
They're angels.
Right.
When did you get discovered? When did you find a family?
Well, when I was about 7 and a half.
So for 3 or 4 years, as far as you know, you were living like that.
I was living like a wild child, yeah. Wow. Basically, that's what I was labeled. You know, the clothes that my mom had put on me basically had disappeared by then. I had lice, my hair was all matted. I was skinny as a rail. I had scars all over my body, boils. You know, I was pretty much emancipated, just very, very skinny, and basically became a wild child, yeah.
Wow. I wish I had you for 3 days. I got to take a break. When we come back, I want to share with us who picked you up as a family.
Yes.
And how you found God.
Yes.
By the way, all of this is in this fascinating book, and you may want to grab it. She's Mine, a war orphan's incredible journey of survival. And you're just getting bits and pieces of it. You may want to check that out. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Paulina, and I work at theDove TV. Did you know that when you support theDove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, thedove.us.
Okay, we're back, and our special guest today is Stephanie Fast. What an incredible story. I wish I had you for about 4 days, because I think we're just scratching the surface here. She's authored a book, She Is Mine, and you may want to check this book out at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, or you can go to stephaniefast.org and get a copy of the book there. A war orphan's incredible journey of survival. And you talk about a miracle. We're talking to a miracle today. And Stephanie, fascinating story. You were abandoned by your mother somewhere between 3 and 4 years old. You were left on a train. She left you. You went to who knows where, some village. And you wandered as a wild child for at least 3, maybe 4 years.
About 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Eating what you could find to eat, wearing what you could find to wear.
Yes.
You are a mixed child, so you're American and Korean, and that was a no-no in your culture, so you were an outcast. All right, so who discovers you? Who picks you up?
Well, when I was about 7 or maybe 7 and a half, every summer back in the 60s, there would be a small cholera epidemic that would break out. It just, you know, at that time, South Korea was still a third world country, and summers were very, very hot. And I think, well, I shouldn't say I think, I had the beginning stages of cholera, but by that time I had wandered into a fairly large city, and I was living with street children under the bridges and along the riversides. And my group, they became a family, and I woke up one morning and my family was gone. I think they knew that an epidemic was starting, and they decided to go back out into the country. In my delirious stage, I found another little child that was trying to figure out someone to take care of her, and she was screaming, and I said, okay, well, we'll get some food for her and I. But I had lived in the city long enough for the market farmers that ran the market recognized me as someone that stole, and they caught me that day, and they took me to a building that had been bombed out during the war. But also it was right along the river, so it was like a breathing ground for gutter rats. I don't know if you've seen gutter rats, but they're not pleasant, right? And I was basically thrown into that building as live bait for the gutter rats. And that, I remember being thrown in, I remember screaming, I remember watching these rats as they were coming towards me, but that's the last thing I remember. When I woke up, I was looking into blue, blue eyes. A Swedish nurse found me on a garbage heap. I cannot tell you how I went from the building to a garbage heap.
The Lord.
Yeah. And a Swedish nurse decided to go home through what she called garbage lane. It was a landfill that they were filling in with garbage, and she saw me. But her first reaction was not to rescue me, because again, there were thousands of children that needed rescue. She knew there was a summer fever going on, and I was like 7 years old, too old for her clinic that she was running. And so she was basically going to leave me there to die. But God spoke to her. She actually heard an audible voice. And the audible voice said 3 words: "She is mine."
Wow, that's the name of the book.
Yes, yeah.
Wow, so she picks you up.
She picked me up, took me back to her clinic, nursed me back to life, and then she placed me in an orphanage.
Okay.
And I was in that orphanage for about 2 years. But again, when you're 8 and 9 years old, you sort of become a worker in the orphanage. You're getting too old. You're getting ready to be phased out. Back in those days when you were like 10 or 11, a lot of them were sold as bond servants to wealthier people. So I was 9. So my job was, washing all the diapers and taking care of the kids. And that was sort of my lot in life. And the orphanage did everything that they could, but they didn't have the finances that for the hundreds of children that were in there. So our care was very minimal. And but it was better than the streets.
Wow.
And that's where I lived.
Warm water and a roof.
Warm water, that was about it. Running corn mush.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so tell us, we're going to run out of time, but tell us, how did you find God?
Well, I found God after I was adopted. Yeah. In the orphanage, they did send you to church, and I heard about God. I could not fathom the God of love because I didn't know what love felt like. And I had been told now for 9 years that I was a mistake and that no one wanted me. So how could this invisible God love somebody that nobody wanted? So I could not really receive God at that point. I was too young to really even understand. Yeah.
So an American family adopted you?
Yes. Yes.
At the age of 9?
9.
Okay. And where did you go to live?
Well, they brought me out of the orphanage when I was 9, but I was not officially adopted till I was 12.
Okay.
As you know, with adoption, it takes 2 to 3 years. But I had the privilege of living with them because they were missionaries in South Korea, and that's when I was really introduced to Jesus. I saw it through my adopted dad. He was just an amazing man.
Did you pray to get adopted?
No, I didn't know what adoption was. Even after I was adopted, I didn't know what adoption was. Yes.
You didn't understand the full impact of what it was.
No.
Wow. Tell me about your encounter with Jesus.
Well, I had, it's really hard to explain to people because I had my first encounter with Jesus when I was 10 because I wanted to make my adopted parents happy. So I thought, I want to do what makes them happy. So I said the Lord, the sinner's prayer, and I was water baptized. And when I was about 16 years old, I had a really emotional breakdown. And so I had an encounter with Jesus then. But I think my life began to change, and I had a yes spirit that no matter what, I was going to follow him. And that was when I was 17. Yes.
Wow. You're in the United States.
Yes.
You learned English.
I learned English.
You did it, and beautifully.
Thank you.
Beautifully. Must have been quite the transition.
It was. I mean, my mom and my dad spent hours with me with those flashcards.
Yeah.
Like we use with the little children.
Right.
And just recognizing sound with pictures. And I actually started memorizing scripture verses even before I could speak English. And so my mom said my first words were like, Psalms 23 and different scripture verses.
Really?
Yes.
When did you realize that the Lord was going to call you back into this work?
I did not want to ever share my adoption story or my orphan story. That was my story. No one should know. My parents only even knew parts of it.
Wow.
And it was not until I got married and I realized I had some deep inner pain and I was acting out on my husband. But back in the early 70s, there were no books out on inner healing.
Yeah.
And so we had to basically, the two of us, fast and pray and say, God, for this marriage to work, you need to help us. And so that's when I began to share My husband knew because I would have horrible nightmares, and he prayed, and eventually the stories started coming out. But I still did not want to share publicly. And then one day we began to work with street children, and I began to hear some horrible stories that happened here in America. And the Lord said, you got to do something. You can't just open the Bible and tell them Bible stories. They need to know someone walked in their shoes. And so that's how our ministry sort of began.
You know, again, I've said it, I don't know how many times on this program, whatever God saves you from, brings you through,
Yes.
He turns you around, makes you a minister too. You seem to be very comfortable with that now.
I am very comfortable with it. I have seen miracles happen for thousands and thousands of people because they just needed to hear someone say, I understand. Yeah.
Is abandonment epidemic today in the world?
I believe abandonment and rejection is a disease in the world.
In America?
In America, in Christian churches.
And that's sad. So when people hear your story in a Christian church, are you surprised that they come out and say, that's my story too?
Over and over. The first time I was on a radio station, a famous radio station,
You're on the most famous one now. No.
Yeah, one of the famous ones.
Yeah.
They had tens of thousands of letters from people saying, she's telling my story. And they could not understand it because they're saying, are they all orphans? But if we're orphans of the heart,
Yeah.
we don't.
And you're abandoned by family and loved ones.
Yes.
And it can be totally emotional and psychological.
That's right. Yeah.
What materials do you have beside your book that would help a person who feels abandoned or parents who are trying to deal with somebody who's been abandoned?
Well, we have a DVD series called You Are Mine, which is similar to that. And it's a 4-part DVD that I break my story down and then give teachings with it. And then we have a workbook that goes along with it. We have another DVD series that's called Journey Ahead. That's actually my story after we were married and how God went through different healings in my life. And we're actually just in the process of putting a workbook and a DVD series together that's going to call No Longer a Slave. Yeah.
All right, and all of that's available at stephaniefast.org.
Yes.
All one word, stephaniefast, FAST.org, and also check out the book. Do you feel compelled to go back to Korea for anything?
Oh, I have gone back to Korea many times.
Really?
And I believe, again, that was God's assignment. The first 3 times I went back after I was married, I hated every minute of it. And you know, what's amazing is your perspective and attitude, people respond accordingly to it. The first 3 times I went just because God told me to, and I hated it. And the people treated me the same way as when I was a small child.
Really?
The 4th time, as I was flying into South Korea, I heard the voice of the Lord say to me, welcome home, Stephanie, welcome home. And honestly, it was like God said, you need to realize this is home. And my whole perspective changed. And so even the immigration officer treated me differently.
Really?
It was just amazing how when we carry who we are in Christ, people respond to you accordingly to it. And that time in South Korea, my experience was totally different. And God used me with South Koreans that were born internationally.
Wow.
You know, again, they're not mixed like I am in blood, but they are mixed in culture because now South Korea, you know, they go all over the world, but so when they come back to South Korea, they don't know who they are.
Stephanie, you are an inspiration.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
I want to get you back. I got to scoot here, but let me just say to our viewers and listeners, check out her book, She's Mine. There's a picture up there on the screen. You can go to her website, stephaniefast.org, and get it there. Amazon. Incredible story. But if you are dealing with abandonment at any level, no matter what level it is, I would recommend that you get a hold of Stephanie through her website, stephaniefast.org. And if the Lord's leading you to kind of connect with her and maybe deal with the subject in your church or whatever, there's a lot of resources there. Stephanie, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You are an inspiration. What a story. You are a miracle.
I am a miracle. Yes, I am.
Well, blessings on you. Thanks for
Thank
being with
you.
us today. Okay, we'll be right back.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paula, and I work at theDove TV. Every day we get letters and emails from people who've been encouraged, blessed, and challenged by the programs on theDove TV. But we couldn't do it without you. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to bring inspiration and hope to our community by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or call us at 541-776-5368.
Welcome back, and hey, what an honor for us today to have Paul Batura with us. He's Focus on the Family Vice President, and he wears a lot of hats, and I think he jumps tall buildings and outruns locomotives, but we are delighted to have him with us. Hi, Paul. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Perry. How about yourself?
Fine. Thanks for being with us. Hey, before we get into our topic, give us an update at Focus on the Family. You guys do so many wonderful things. What's happening there?
You know, Perry, thanks for your kind words. We're coming off of a great debut of a film called The Dropbox that was seen by almost 300,000 people in theaters across America. It tells a story about a South Korean pastor who literally rescues little babies that would otherwise be abandoned and left to die in the streets of Seoul, South Korea. So we're really excited to get the word out there about this one man, and then ultimately encourage people to consider foster care and adoption. So that's probably the highlight that we're most excited about.
You know, it's interesting because I just had Stephanie Fast on, who was an abandoned Korean child at the age of 3 or 4 years old, and her story parallels the Dropbox story, and again, bringing a lot of attention to people to the whole subject of adoption.
It's a wonderful thing to look at a story and look at someone's life years later and to see how their life was changed through the gift of adoption. I'm really glad you had her on.
That's wonderful. Well, Paul, you used to be an umpire?
I was, back in my former life. I played ball as a kid in high school and was able to become an umpire for Little League, Babe Ruth League, and other, smaller leagues in my town. So that was a great way to stay attached to the game.
Well, you have an interesting concern about parents' involvement in their kids' sports, and so often we'll go to a Little League game and watch the kids play baseball on the field while the parents are doing a boxing match in the stands.
Yeah, sometimes it's a little more interesting what goes on in the stands, but I saw it as a young man. I was not a parent at the time. I was 20 years old, and now I'm a parent. I have 3 boys. I coach. I encounter officials like any other coach would. But I'll tell you, it's an interesting, sometimes glaring spectacle to see how parents interact with umpires.
Well, let's talk about that. Why do parents get so emotionally involved in this?
Well, I mean, that's a good question, Perry. I think a lot of it has to do with parents living vicariously through their kids. They remember what it was like to be a kid. Maybe they didn't achieve what they wanted to, or they want to go back to that. And so they get really emotionally invested in the game rather than, just simply encouraging their son or daughter. And that can be pretty damaging. I mean, you find yourself angry at the umpire rather than paying more attention to what your son or daughter is doing on the field. Some parents obviously get exercised about it, but the reality is most keep it in balance. So I don't want to suggest that it's an epidemic that's ruining it for everyone, but we all know that parent. I mean, you don't want to be that parent, who everyone is looking at. Your child is embarrassed because, you're the loudest in the stands. It's one thing to be an encourager. It's another thing to be obnoxious. And I think nobody wants to be that obnoxious parent.
All right. So, for the sake of discussion, describe a typically out of control parent. What do they look like?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think we all know what they look like. They're loud. They're they call attention to themselves. They're very critical of not only officiating, but they can also be critical of their own son or daughter. Taking it another layer, I've seen parents who are critical of other kids, maybe kids on their own team. And that is, of course, off-putting, but it's also just unbelievably discouraging to the child. Their own parents not there, maybe, or maybe they are, and then you get into the parental arguments in the stands. I've seen those happen as well. But the other out of control parent, I think, is one who really meddles with the coach. There's one thing to help coach a team. As a coach, I welcome other parents helping out. In fact, if your child is playing in a youth sports league, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to the coach. Just because you put your registration fee down and you get your child there on time with the proper equipment doesn't mean you can't be involved. Now, I know there are different levels and there's different expectations, and not every coach is going to be as opening and as welcoming as some might be. But just speaking personally, I love it when other dads say, can I give you a hand? Because practice can be obviously a little chaotic. I don't only have a certain skill set. Other parents come from a background perhaps more applicable to the sport than me. So I love it when other fathers get involved. Mothers, the same deal if it seems right and a coach is open to that. But I think we can look at that and say, this is what we really want. We don't want that loud, obnoxious parent in the stands.
Were you ever abused as an umpire by a parent?
Well, verbally, sure. I was yelled at quite a bit. I mean, I'd like to think I was a decent umpire. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I made every call correct. In fact, I remember when I was first an umpire, I was calling this game. It was a Little League contest, and I was taking my responsibilities very seriously. And I was calling the balls and strikes. I had a tight strike zone, and the supervisor of the umpires actually was behind home plate, behind the cage. He called me over in between innings, and he said, hey, listen, you got to open up the strike zone a little bit. He said, you're calling this game too tight. He said, the score is 28-27. I think you can, kids are walking around the diamond. So, I've been harassed. I've been harangued. The most memorable incident for me was a parent after a close play that ended the game, followed me to my car and kept haranguing me and asking me, insulting me. And I just didn't want to get into it. And so I just kind of kept my head down. I acknowledged them. They were much older than I was. But I literally had to drive away. I never felt like I was going to get attacked, but it was that venom and that much energy was in it. And I remember at that moment thinking, I do not want to be one of those parents when I'm fortunate enough to have kids. It happens. And, I've thrown parents out of the park, or at least out of the stands. I've thrown plenty of kids out, kids that throw bats and throw helmets and curse. And, that's just not the way you want to play the game. It ruins the experience for everybody.
All right, I got to take a break here, Paul, but when we come back, I'd like for you to share with us the impact that this has on kids, because the kids are sent out there to have a good time. They're trying to learn the sport. They're trying to learn what it is to work as a team. They're trying to take directions from somebody other than the parent. And then the parent preempts all of that with some kind of an outburst. It's got to be pretty impacting on a young person. So I want you to respond to that. We'll be right back with Focus on the Family Vice President Paul Batura in just a moment.
Hi, I'm Daniel and I work at theDove TV. Compared to Portland, Seattle, and LA, Medford might be considered a small market. But at theDove, we're excited about the opportunity to make a big impact right here in our community. And you help make that happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us now by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or by phoning 541-776-5368.
Hey, welcome back, and what a delight and an honor to have with us today Paul Batura. He's one of the vice president of Focus on the Family, and they do a great work there, as you know. We've been partners with Focus on the Family for well over 30 years here at theDove, and we consider our relationship with them to be vital in the services that they provide to our viewers and listeners and the work that they do really around the world. And Paul's unique because he's sharing with us today the interesting phenomenon of parents that get a little too uptight or exercise or rambunctious during a sporting event when their kids are on the field playing that. He's been an umpire and a coach, and so he knows firsthand. Paul, first of all, let me ask you this before I get to that question. Is there much of a difference in spotting or dealing with a parent that's somewhat abusive and out of control as an umpire and a coach, or is it still the same kind of thing going on?
Well, I think in general it's more or less the same. I think, it's always a little different based on your perspective. I think as a coach, my concern are my boys on the field. I don't pay that much attention to the parent in the stands. As an umpire, I try to zone out the parents as well, but you can't help but interfere with the game, especially when the kids are responding to the parents, because there's that emotional connection. It's very easy to kind of get that tipping point where if a parent or a group of parents is particularly obnoxious in the stands, that can change the mood of the kids. I mean, it's the classic rule that parents are an example for their children, good or bad, and so a good example in the stands normally translates into a good bench and a good group of kids on the field.
Have you ever had to deal with bullying as a coach?
I've dealt with children who are not the kindest to one another, sure. That kind of breaks your heart. I mean, I like to say I think I have a heart for the underdog. And so you try as a coach to identify the children on your team that might need a little extra tender touch. And, you protect them as best you can. But other kids, sure, I mean, especially, football, where there is an opportunity for contact, a little less so in baseball. Baseball is more of a verbal abuse. Football can be a little bit more dangerous if the kids are trying to take out their vengeance on one another.
Is one of the standard complaints you're not playing my kid enough?
Yeah, that does happen, and a lot of that is expectation. I mean, I am of the mindset as a coach that in the younger leagues, especially, I play all my kids as equal as I can. And I set that up with the parents. Often it's a matter of talking with them about where I think their child is best going to perform and is going to have the best success. Not every father wants their son to be quarterback, but a lot do. And you don't want to put a kid in a position where he's going to fail. At the same time, you want to have him have a little experience there, at least to taste it and to see it. But as a coach, that's your job to make sure you put the kids in the right place. But I am not one of those hyper competitive coaches. Winning is not everything, and that's something you try and teach kids very early on. That success is not defined as a matter of winning and losing. It's defined by your attitude, by sportsmanship, and by enjoyment. And that sounds in some ways cliche. It doesn't matter. There's that saying, it doesn't matter. Winning isn't everything. It's the only thing. That's probably the worst philosophy in youth sports. But again, I want to stress that most parents out there are cooperative, but you just have those few who get overly excited and kind of ruin it for everyone else.
All right, let's go to the question, and that is, what damage does this do to the child whose parents is out of control, and even the peer pressure that they may cause among the team?
Yeah, I mean, I think to answer that question, I might turn it around and say, you remember, to a child who's had a good parent and a good coach, do you remember them? You think about what that experience was like and how impactful it was on you as a person. I mean, I remember my father very gently encouraging me from the stands. I remember a coach doing the same. I remember those coaches and very fondly. I think they instill confidence in a player. They instill good sportsmanship, a good attitude. Conversely, I think you can really damage someone. You can kill a kid's confidence. You can obviously embarrass them. I like to remind parents that the ride home from the park is sometimes the most important ride of the day, because if you set the tone the first few minutes, you sit back in that car. If you're critiquing your son or daughter and asking them a series of questions, why did you swing at that pitch? Why didn't you cut off the corner? That sort of thing. You're immediately putting the child on the defensive, and you're really setting the tone for future performance, because now they're thinking about it. That doesn't mean to say any critique is bad, but there's obviously a time and a place for it. And a time and a place is probably not immediately after the game, especially if it's a measure of critique.
What about the pregame family huddle? How important is that? So the kid coming out of the car going to the coach, what should parents be saying to their child?
Well, I think that sets the tone. I think you obviously are competing against yourself. You're competing against the past performance. You can't control everyone on your team, and of course, there's different sports have different dynamics. Team sports, play a little differently than, if someone's golfing, of course, or, doing something where you're rated in a, gymnastics or something like that. That's truly where you're competing against yourself. But I always encourage our kids to encourage another player, lift them up, both emotionally and even spiritually, to just be that encouraging guy. If you're not in the game, I don't want you sulking on the sidelines. I want you applauding, hollering out, rooting on your fellow teammates. I mean, those are the kids that are sort of the straw that stirs the drink. I love those kids who may not be in the game, but their head's in the game because they're encouraging other players. But the tone, you talk about the pre-family huddle, the tone is set at home. And what our kids are doing is they're watching us to see how we respond to professional athletics, as an example. Are you the kind of person who sits in front of your television on a weekend and yells at the TV, that is mood rises and falls based on the success of your team? Well, if your professional or collegiate team, if that's you, that your child is picking up on that. And what they're seeing is that means a lot to my mom or dad. And so that means I'm going to have to perform in order to satisfy them or to win their approval. If professional sports is an idol in your life, that's going to be probably played out on the field for your kids, because your kids are picking up on that. So you have to be really careful. There's a healthy balance, right, between rooting for a team and having a healthy admiration for another team and making it an idol in your life.
Well, that's solid advice. Thank you, Paul. I've seen some games where a parent gets pretty disruptive, and other parents will shout that parent down. Now what do we do?
Well, yeah, I like to leave that to other parents at times, but I think there is a measure of self-correction in the stands, and that's good. I mean, it's good that parents are there, and it's good that they're kind of self-policing each other. It's not up to you as a coach or even as an official to be the overall arbiter in the stands. I mean, you simply have to manage it, but leave it to the other parents often to take care of things.
All right, Paul, the other question that comes out of this, I think a lot of parents are looking for ways to have their kids involved in something outside of school. And obviously Little League or Pop Warner football, gymnastics, swimming, all of these are opportunities. And yet they're obligations. But how important is it, do you think, as a parent, a coach, an umpire, that kids have something that deals with team effort?
Well, I think it's good. I think it's a healthy type of activity. At the same time, I really encourage parents that don't set goals for your kids. Only your children can set the goals for themselves. Our job as a parent is to counsel, to encourage, to set a vision even for what we want our children to turn out to be. But if you're pushing your child into a particular sport because you want them to play that sport, you're kind of setting them up for eventual disappointment or failure or frustration. That said, team sports is a wonderful outlet, assuming you have the right group of kids, you're in the right league. I often encourage parents to, don't just sign up for the first league that's out there. The type of skills and the types of, things you learn as a kid can be found in a church league, can be found at the YMCA, and can be found in Little League and more organized sports. But I mean, we all know people, and maybe we are guilty of this ourselves, where sports begins to take over our lives. And instead of having a fun weekend as a family, you've turned yourself into a taxi cab driver and you're running your kids back and forth, and you're missing church on Sunday because there's an out-of-town game, or you're putting plane tickets on a credit card because the team has a travel event. That's not healthy. And I think you really have to consider the whole family when you consider your child's extracurricular activities. It's good to play, but it's simply play. And those types of skills learned on the field can also be experienced elsewhere, not necessarily in sports, but in Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Awana, all those types of activities that as Christians that we want to support.
I think sometimes the other thing we ought to be sensitive to, where we'd like one of our children to say do some kind of a sport because we did it, but they're not interested in it. Where do you draw the line on that? So that you let them be an individual and go in another direction.
I think you really do. I think you can, if you want your son to play baseball and he doesn't show any interest in it whatsoever, I think that's where you test it out in the backyard, do a pickup game, wiffle ball, that sort of thing. When they're young, they're pretty malleable, but as they age and their skills begin to emerge and certainly their interests, I think you have to let children make their own choices in that regard. I mean, if the alternative is sitting on the couch playing video games, that's not a good alternative. So you have to look at what's the motivation. But I mean, my wife is a terrific musician. And, she played softball, tried it as a girl. She didn't like it, but she wound up going to school with an oboe scholarship. So, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, thank goodness for the diversity of talents with kids. So I do think we have to be careful, and we have to play to our kids' strengths, not to our own. And knowing that difference and finding that difference is key.
This is very encouraging, and I think you serve a lot of parents who are struggling with, what to do, when to stop it, when to get in it, when to get out of it, what to do with they don't become over involved in it. There's a balance to all of this, but boy, it's impacting because those few years in a young child's life, whether they're involved in sports or not, is pretty critical on how the parents respond to everything.
It is critical, Perry, and I'll tell you this, it goes quickly. I'm still in it, and yet what I hear time and time again, you've heard it too, I'm sure, is that, enjoy the time you have with your kids because you're going to blink and it's going to be over. And I think we have to be very intentional with how we spend that time. Look at the end at the beginning. Where do you want to wind up? Do you want to have regrets? Do you want your children? Where do you want your kids to be? Not every child's going to grow up to be a professional athlete. I think sometimes intuitively we think they will, and that's why we justify all the time we spend and money we spend with them. But the reality is the vast majority of kids grow up to be adults just like us, who have a job and who serve their church and who have a family, and you want that well-rounded, balanced child and or adult, and that starts as a child, and it's up to you as a parent to put them on that right path. But remember, it goes quick, and don't waste it.
I got about a minute left, Paul, and speak to the fact that sometimes these activities with these children in sports, it's a season. It will end. It may not become their career. It's just one of those things in their life.
It will, that's right. And I think some parents might say soccer never ends. At least that's what it seems like in our town. There's always seems to be a soccer season, but it will end. And, you live and you play. And again, finding that balance is key. And not making an idol of sports for your kid is important as they grow older. But again, it has a lot of positive benefit, a lot of upside to it. But again, finding that balance, learning how to win well, learning how to lose well is a great lesson for a young person.
Paul, thank you for your time, and thank you to you and Jim and John, the whole crew there at Focus. You guys are wonderful what you do and the services you provide. Just give our best to everybody, and our partnership with you over these 30 plus years, believe me, we hold it in high regard. Thank you for what you do.
Well, thank you, Perry, and same to you at Dove TV. We really appreciate what you're doing.
God bless you, pal. We'll see you next time. All right. And again, check out Focus on the Family on the Dove Radio, on the Dove TV. We air all of their things. And, of course, you can go to Focus on the Family website with an incredible amount of resources available to you. All right. Thanks for being with us today. We'll see you next time on Focus Today.
Hi, I'm Jim, and I work at the Dove TV. Every weekday between 6 and 8 a.m., our award-winning news and sports team bring you the best morning show around. It's live, it's honest, and it's a whole lot of fun. And you help make it happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to air local programs that share your voice by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us.